While we wait for the slider to come up, I'm kind of curious, what made you interested in applying this area of research to kind of programming and software developers in particular?
Great question. It was actually sort of backward. I started around 4 years ago publishing content courses on productivity. And the contingent, the percentage of software developers just started growing faster and faster and faster to the point where I had to ask, why are a third to a half of my customers software developers? And I asked them, and what they told me was, your approach to productivity, to learning, and to content has really strong parallels to software. And I really knew nothing, still don't know very much about software development, but I found myself sort of pulled backward into it. And by exploring it and learning more about how software is made and managed, I've discovered all these ways of describing new ways of describing what I've sort of had intuition about. And that's been hugely rewarding. It's like I'm trying to put words to something, and then it exists in software as the single responsibility principle. Oh, well, there's a Wikipedia article on it, I can just read that.
Very nice. Yeah, very nice. All right, so we have quite a few questions from the audience. Yes, user 27 is very active here. So I think you'll probably be able to tell us about the book that you mentioned specifically in the content afterward. Are you familiar with different development methodologies, Agile, Scrum, Kanban, this kind of thing?
Yeah, the funny thing is I'm almost more familiar with like meta, like ways of organizing and structuring software development than actual software. So I can sometimes speak to like the management or the logistical or operations layer, such as Agile or Scrum or whatever it is, more than the technical details. So yeah, I'm pretty familiar.
Do you have any thoughts in terms of like, are these totally orthogonal to the research that you've been doing, or do they kind of fit in with your research?
Man, I feel like wary of wading into the Agile Scrum like maelstrom of controversy. Trying to see if I have anything interesting to say on that. I mean, the most interesting thing that strikes me about that is like, it's like we're already in the post-Agile era in the software development community. Like all these viral blog posts are like, Scrum is dead, you know, Scrum is a trash dumpster fire, all these things. Whereas the mainstream hasn't even started catching on to these things. So I consistently see that the software development community is like 1 to 2 generations ahead of the mainstream. Like things that are being adopted now here in 10 or 20 years are going to be adopted in the mainstream. And to me, that's a tragedy. Like I want to like break out these ideas from around productivity and learning and all these things from the software community, or help people break them out into the wider world, because there's so much benefit to doing so. So I feel like, I don't know, I don't have any like particular strong opinions on Agile or Scrum, just that we need to get that whole world into the mainstream faster.
By mainstream, like, can you give us an example of what you mean, like where you think that this could be applied effectively?
An example of?
So you're saying that like these are already being applied in software development and kind of the software development world. Where else could it be applied, and like what does mainstream mean in this case?
Oh yeah, good point. Really everyone else besides software developers, all knowledge workers. You know, like knowledge workers, this was a term, I know it's kind of a weird term, knowledge workers, it sounds so buzzwordy. It was coined, I think, in the 80s by some management consultant. But I think it's actually pretty accurate. It's people that, you know, their knowledge is their main asset, it's their main skill, it's the main thing they bring to the table. So I'm thinking, you know, when I say knowledge worker and mainstream, I'm thinking lawyers, I'm thinking analysts, any kind of business person, researchers, students, teachers. I mean, really everyone who deals with information these days, which is practically everyone.
Interesting. So there's a lot of, I think, probably nitty-gritty details that people are curious about, like how this affects, or how this thought process kind of applies to various techniques. So I don't know, are you familiar with the Pomodoro technique?
Oh yeah.
Like, is this, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a perfect example. It's like, how long has the Pomodoro technique been around? Like, seriously. I think maybe decades or something. It was an Italian guy, I think he introduced it. You would not believe how many people I mention that to, and it completely blows their mind. I mean, they're like high, you know, paid, like I don't know, Wall Street finance guys, and I like tell them the Pomodoro technique. They're just like, oh my God, I can't believe how this revolutionized my productivity. And I'm just like, wow, there's that quote, like, the future is already here, it's just not well distributed. And I think it's so true, the future is here. There are people that are, there's the myth of or the reality of the 10x engineer, or the 50x engineer, the 100x engineer. These people exist. It's just their knowledge is not well distributed because our knowledge tends to be stuck in here, which is one reason every time I come across a smart person, which there's a lot here, I go, you have to get your knowledge out of your head. You have to publish, write, speak, present as much as you possibly can.
So there's kind of like, you're talking about in this case, there's like an ingestion process where we need to centralize all of these different bits of information and whatnot. There's also the need to kind of get it out after that, right, to write it down and whatnot. Is there any software in particular that you recommend, or any technique, some sort of disciplinary kind of approach that you can recommend for the ingestion portion?
Yeah, I mean, there's my own. I tried not to, do too much of a hard sell, but I do teach an online course. It's actually a boot camp. It's a month-long, 100-hour boot camp on how to set up, organize, maintain, and actually put to use PKM systems, which is like the weird, like, I don't even know how people find me or what they think when they land on this webpage and they see that. But this is my main focus right now, is developing that technique. I mean, we can get into it. It has 3 pillars, basically. It's actually 3 techniques. One for capture, one for organizing, and one for sharing or retrieval. And they're really just, they're not, I don't even know if, I guess they're techniques. They're essentially like routines or habits very similar to GTD, to getting things done. That's really been my inspiration. I started 4 years ago teaching a class on GTD, and I just saw that like you can teach people a method, like almost like a meta layer to whatever, and they can use whatever tools they want, right? It's completely abstracted from the tools. They can just, I mean, the testimonials people get, I'm sure many of you have seen after adopting GTD, is like, I have more time to spend with my kids, my whole state of mind is revolutionized, I sleep better. It's like, it is a complete transformation in people's productivity, and I wanted to do something that was a complement. So essentially, I think of PKM. GTD is focused on actionable information, right? Like open loops, tasks, projects, things you do, actions. And even in the most recent edition of Getting Things Done, which was republished in 2015, there's like 5 or 6, I have a blog post on this you can find on my blog if you want, but 5 or 6 times in the new edition, he says non-actionable information, which he calls reference information, which is the counterpart, is like one of the greatest opportunities for productivity today. It's so important. It's the biggest thing you have to take on. He keeps saying this, but then it's not addressed within the GTD framework. So I saw these quotes and I started to think, wow, what if you could create a GTD for non-actionable information, for content, right? And the truth is it's way harder, because tasks are almost like, they're very discrete, almost like scientifically formulated, verb, like subject, object, target. They're almost like a string of code, whereas content it's like unstructured data. No templates, no standardized formats, nothing. So you have to create the formats, the standards.
How much of excuse me? How much of this relies on, for example, being very disciplined about kind of you mentioned annotating and adding lots of metadata and whatnot. If I fall off the wagon, for example, how useful would this system be?
It's a great question, and by far the biggest single problem with GTD, or thing that causes people to stop doing it, is they don't maintain their weekly review, right? And David Allen calls it the master key to GTD. Well, if you lose the key, then you're done. And so the method, the course that I developed, it really was built from the ground up, and this is one of the things that people have the hardest time wrapping their heads around, is like if you hear a course, where the tagline is organize your digital life, like your entire digital life, it immediately calls to mind like insane amounts of upfront cataloging, tagging, capturing, putting into schemas, putting into categories, all these things. And that turns people off, right? Especially the kinds of people that most need organizing. And so I've done a lot of studying manufacturing, like really like actual physical manufacturing, which is one of the, still decades after we think, oh, that time is done, that time is over, it's still such a rich source of insights. And just-in-time organization is a really interesting idea. If you get organizing, which needs to be done, right? But instead of basically front-loading it, where you're doing all this upfront work that's high friction and poses a very steep cost, and in a world that's changing quickly, you have no idea if that's going to pay off. You know, it's like, what if you organize all this stuff and it ends up being stuff you don't even need in the future? You push, you backload, you push to the latest possible moment all of that organizing. You basically like structure, like put a minimum amount of structure and metadata around information such that when the time comes to actually use it, you can very quickly almost do like a sprint to very quickly assemble, kind of like late binding, assemble and bind together the content or the modules that you need.
Do you have any kind of recommendations outside of the course, or like if you can give us a synopsis of techniques to actually stick to this? So for not losing that master key, for example?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that really makes people fall off the wagon is perfectionism. Is really waiting and waiting and waiting until they have just the right system, just the right categories, just the right tool, right? I mean, tool especially with software developers. The amount of developers I've talked to that are somewhere in the process of manually coding their own perfect note-taking system is just boggles my mind. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. Like, and then I tell them, you know, you could just use like Evernote or Bear, these like really world-class programs that cost a few bucks a month. No, because I need, you know, encryption at rest, no. And I just go, so what are you doing in the meantime? Oh, I'm just not collecting anything. I think that the beginning is just collecting everything. Everything you come across, start capturing it. And every person that I've had do this is shocked that they actually are content-producing machines all the time. Their conversations, their notes, the little snippets of text they highlight in articles. There's a great app called GetLiner. If you don't know about, it's on Twitter, GetLiner. The app is just called Liner. That basically gives you a highlighter for the web. So anytime you find you have an article, instead of like web clipping the whole article, saving the whole thing, then extracting the text, you just right there click one button and highlight. It extracts that text, and then you can save it to Evernote, Google Drive, email, all these different things. And then once you have all this content captured, that triggers the next phase, which is, oh well, I should, you know, do something with this.
You mentioned a little bit about this idea of whenever you bring on a new hire, currently it is a significant investment, right, in terms of both my time and their time to do a knowledge transfer. How do you actually see that working in an ideal world? Like, what should we be doing different, and how would that change things?
Yeah, I mean, that right there is like one of the great problems of...
And you're going to solve it for us right now, right?
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. It's been amazing. I've done a bunch of research recently on wikis. And in theory, wikis are the solution to all this, right? You have one place, single source, anyone can edit. You have community editing, all these different things. And it's really not lived up to its promise. I mean, even just yesterday, I saw an article. I didn't read the whole thing, but even Wikipedia, the one example we have where it seemed like it worked, is having a lot of issues, having a lot of challenges. I think the wiki paradigm it's dead. It's maybe fulfilled 1% of its potential. Same thing with knowledge bases. Same thing with expert systems. A lot of our attempts at doing this have just shown us that it's a lot harder than we think. It's not just. And if I could summarize, like, one reason why I think it's hard is. Knowledge transfer is actually impossible. Like, you know, I have knowledge in my head, right? If I were to write it down for you, or record it, or even just tell you, that's just information, right? What makes knowledge is it's personal. It's embodied, it's embedded in my life context. So the only way for me to really have you get that knowledge is to help you reconstruct it. Right? And we know this. I have to give you exercises, like have you try things, fail, then I come back. Basically, be a teacher, a mentor, or a guide. Right? But then what that implies is the problem of knowledge management, which that problem sounds so like architectural and logistical, is actually a fundamental human problem. It implies that we have to teach people how to teach, how to tell stories, how to persuade and convince, how to create experiences, learning experiences. Right? Whereas most knowledge managers, and there is this title, CKO, Chief Knowledge Officer, tend to be like really bookish, introverted types that want to be like architecting websites instead of, you know, speaking in front of big groups. I think we just need to completely change how we think about knowledge, how it's acquired, how to transfer it. And I completely lost the track of your question, but.
No, it's still interesting. Is there any kind of concrete vision about how you might effectively bring on a new hire then?
Oh yeah, that was it. I mean, I'd say what I'm working on is like a starting point to that, is having it documented, right? I mean, just a vast majority, I mean, this is so well like known and studied, is how we're all knowledge organizations, you know, that depend on the knowledge of our people. Every CEO says people are our greatest asset, right? We know like all the, well, at least in the US, like the monetary value of human capital, what we know is like 8 times higher than all the physical and financial capital combined. And yet, when someone leaves a job, they just walk out the door and we just go, oh, bye, and they leave with this huge asset in their head, right? So I think, I mean, people have an incentive to capture their knowledge for their own purposes. So do teams, so do organizations. Because just the cost, when you really add it all up, the cost of someone walking out the door is so immense. And I think if we can solve this problem on those 3 levels, it will also help in the training process, you know, like communicating really not just like here's our mission, here's our values, but here is all the standard operating procedures, the learnings. I mean, what happens with most notes taken at retrospectives? I mean, they get put in a drawer or a digital drawer and they're never seen again. There's, in my experience, rarely a built-in process besides like, oh, remember that one sprint like sometime last year where we messed up in this way? It's you know, like it's crazy with, here's a comment on Agile. How much time and effort and blog posts dedicated to like every insane little detail of generating tasks, tracking them, measuring them, right? And yet hardly any put to capturing and managing what we learned from completing those tasks. To me, that was the whole purpose of doing the task, was to have the learning. And yet we don't, I think we're afraid to. There's a fear, like, it's so daunting and so, like I said, unstructured and ambiguous. It's easier just to stick with tasks. That you can do t-shirt sizes and points and like measure all these different ways. It's more like feasible.
You mentioned wikis and kind of not living up to their potential. One of the issues is that the information that it contains can quickly go stale. Like how does your system, or how would you recommend organizing things in a way such that it still stays relevant, I guess, with as little friction as possible?
Yeah, great. So, excuse me. I think the problem with not only wikis, but so many types of places we capture knowledge is almost always it's optimized for others' consumption, right? You go on Wikipedia, who is it optimized for? The newcomer, right? If you want to actually be on the inside, be a producer, you click on that little edit thing, and suddenly, oh my God, you're overwhelmed by all the comments and people arguing back and forth, and you know, Markdown is pretty easy, but it takes a little bit of learning. Even the Google Docs, it's based on that Microsoft Office paradigm of a document. And I think why I like the paradigm of notes is it's messy on purpose. It's optimized for you. You know, you just jot something down in a little notebook, you capture something on an app on your phone. It's messy and in little pieces and fragmented on purpose. And one thing that allows you to do, this has actually been recent. If you go on my GitLab repository, it's Forte Labs. I think it would be GitLab/Forte Labs. I'm developing with a partner an app called Random Note. And what Random Note does, it's really just a little tiny script. It lives in your dock. It's only for Mac. We're going to have a web-based version that works on all platforms soon. Almost ready, but for now only for Mac. And what it does is you click it, and it just surfaces a random Evernote note for you. And at first, you know, when we first created it, I was like, oh, maybe once a day during my like morning routine, I'll click it and like be reminded of something that I captured. I find myself clicking that thing like an addict all day long, 20, 30, 40 times. I feel like it's actually like replaced. It functions on the same triggers as like Facebook and Twitter. Because you get to click something, you get something popping up, you don't know what the thing is going to be, and you don't know if it's going to be good or bad. It's perfect, right? And so I'm constantly reminded, and if there's one thing my mind has been blown by, it's, you know, I have maybe 4,000 notes that come from maybe 60 or 70 past projects. You'd think the chances that any given note the chances that a given note are relevant to a current issue are pretty low. Almost every single note I learn something, gain something, and am able to reuse, right? And that's the beauty of personal knowledge. It's not Google. If you did random Google link, that would not happen, right? By definition, everything in my PKM database is from me. I chose to keep it. So of course, it's more likely to be relevant. But to finally get back to your question, what's really interesting is, so I hit this thing, the thing comes up. The most common action that I take is delete the note. Right, probably 60, maybe 40 or 50% of the time. Because I see it, I go, oh, I remember this. It was useful at the time. I remember why I created it, but it's no longer needed, and I delete. Right? So I'm not only adding, because it's easy to capture. Most people that I see using Evernote, they have like some notes that they're just capturing, but then one day they open it and they're just overwhelmed and they never open it again. If you don't have a method of deleting, of actually culling, like slowly filtering down and cutting down the notes, that's just as important. And if you think about it, that's exactly how our mind works. If you don't access a memory, you don't have to go, oh, file, okay, file structure, delete, right? You just, if you don't access it, so my method is a little more proactive. I actually have to hit delete, but you can envision very soon a PKM system where you haven't accessed this note in this many days or months or years, it's deleted or at least archived. And what you would have is a sort of like valuation of your notes. Like you'd be able to see which are your most valuable notes all the way to the least valuable, only based on how often you've accessed them. And there's a power law to notes that I found. A very small number of your notes really makes up the huge majority of the value, and then the value very quickly diminishes, and there's a very long tail of sort of less and less valuable notes. You can imagine it'd be very useful to know what that minority of most useful notes are, right? It tends to be notes on like really amazing experiences I've had or conferences, notes on books that have been the most influential, notes on articles or sources that were just like, you know, you read those things once in a while, it's like your whole mind paradigm just changes. Imagine if you had all of those notes at your fingertip to review and revisit.
Yeah, that seems like quite a nice thing. As soon as I build it, I think I'll start taking notes. But on that topic, is there a particular software that you recommend? Like, if I want to get started with this, is it just Evernote? Do I just start putting everything in Evernote?
It's a great point, and you know, I do showcase Evernote pretty strongly in all my stuff, and I constantly get the question, you know, can I use something other than Evernote? And the truth is, like, absolutely yes. I have no particular. It's almost like Evernote is sort of, it's like the worst one except for all the others. Yeah. Like it's the least bad. And the field, actually, I'm really excited by some of these apps like Bear. Bear is a really strong up-and-coming startup that is starting to breathe some life into the space because there hasn't been much innovation. There's no pressure. And I think part of that is companies have had a hard time monetizing. It's like precious data. It's precious to us. They haven't figured out how to monetize that data. Maybe when they do, they'll start putting more innovation into it. But yeah, you can use any app. You can even use pencil and paper. There's a great, if you really want to use no digital systems, which I think I would understand maybe if you wanted to, like, you know, have something not online. There's this German system called like Zettel. Does anyone know? Zettelkasten, some big German word, which I'm sure you can find on Google, where this guy developed exactly what I'm talking about in extensive, beautiful detail using only note cards. And it even has this like internal referencing system where any note can reference any other one, even if they change and even if they go out of, it's beautiful. But the fundamental principles are the same. You know, they're the same everywhere. I was going to say one more thing about that. Oh, it's kind of like, so the reason I use Evernote in my course and in my materials is it's kind of like, if you were going to teach a course on word processing, you'd use Microsoft Word, right? You just would. Like, you know, my audience is all around the world. They're using every kind of platform, which Evernote supports. That's a big thing, is pretty much every platform. So I just kind of think, you know, what's the thing that the greatest number of people are going to use? And Evernote really is, they have 230 million users. It's really, besides like Google Suite and Microsoft, one of the very most popular productivity apps in the world. What I'm trying to do is just add like some of the routines and behaviors and techniques to use it productively.
Got it. Kind of along the lines of, you're talking about pruning and kind of figuring out which notes are of the most value. Do you see kind of machine learning or AI kind of coming in and playing a role in either adding metadata or figuring out what is important given the current situation?
Yeah, there's a bunch of people working on this. I mean, it's definitely going to have a huge impact, huge. I've been pretty unimpressed, I think, with a lot of machine learning AI stuff compared to the hype that's been around it. Evernote acquired a startup a couple years ago called Context, where at the bottom of some notes, I don't know why it's only on some notes, but they surface related notes. So if you get to the end of a note and you're like, oh, this was good, you kind of want to see what else you have like that. They haven't really developed it further. I mean, it's very sort of obvious results. Like if the word appears in the note, then it will find other notes in which the word appears. It's not exactly like rocket science. Trying to think if I've seen anything really compelling in the space. I don't know if I have.
Do you feel like it could be a useful thing, like if it can, for example, recognize the subject matter and do this cross-linking one automatically, or is this kind of irrelevant given like we should be doing the pruning and seeing these notes ourselves anyway?
Oh, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time and how it's going to look. Yeah, I mean, hopefully in the future we won't need to do all these things manually. I mean, so easily the content we come across could be captured automatically. It could probably be organized automatically. It could probably be retrieved automatically. I mean, this was the dream of the semantic web. You guys remember that? When that was going to be like the next big thing? We could understand meaning and link to meanings and connotations and like shades of meaning rather than just words. I don't know whatever happened to that, but
I think it's 5 years away still.
Oh yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, 5 years away. Okay, great.
Yes. All right, I think that's probably it for the time. Please thank Tiago.
Thanks everyone. Really good to be here.